Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James DuBos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey, and thank you for joining me on this initial episode of the Launch Capsule. I'm Jim DuBos. I'm the founder of the DuBos Group. Today, I wanted to give you a little bit of insight into my personal journey so that you understand why am I doing what I'm doing. The DuBos Group was created after my own personal 35-year journey as an entrepreneur. I've had the blessing to be an entrepreneur predominantly in a business-to-business environment, although a couple of my companies were business-to-consumer. And during that 35 years, 10 companies, I've successfully exited 7 of those companies through mergers and acquisitions. And I've also been able to be a part of 20 additional mergers and acquisitions for other entrepreneurs. And that's taught me a great deal about this idea behind building a company that has a value that you receive at the end of the journey, whatever that time might be. And my personal story is, I got to go back to when I was in my mid-teens, in the late 70s. My father had a marine nautical business, and little by little, he started also selling sailboats. Sailing was a passion of his, and he wanted to be able to make a little extra money, which is why they originally started the business. And then they started selling sailboats. And so little by little, that inventory of those boats grew. During that time, obviously, as a teenager, I helped my dad with all kinds of things around the boat yard and equipping boats and just working really hard in the hot summers. But I also got to see what it meant to sell to people, to treat people with respect, communication skills, customer service after the sale, all those things that are important as an entrepreneur. But I also, in that journey, had 2 really valuable lessons. One, my dad had a fraud event that occurred, and an individual wrote a check or brought him a bank check, what we thought was a bank check, for $23,000, which at that time was a lot of money to my dad because we didn't have a lot of money to begin with. And turns out that check was a fraudulent check. And so my dad basically ate that money, and it was a terribly painful experience for a small business owner who really didn't have a lot of capital, excess capital to sustain that. Later in the journey of that business, during the late 70s, interest rates were getting higher and higher. And so the cost of floor planning those boats, he had over $1 million worth of inventory on his lot, and the cost of floor planning just became too much. And so we lost that business. And then the consequences of losing that business was a consequence of losing our personal home. And I remember as a teenage boy, basically packing up everything that we had in the house and putting it into the cars and driving off. So it was that the impact of failure, right? The impact of a business failure, and it cauterized in my mind. Later in my journey, as I was in university, I was actually studying landscape architecture and realized in that process that that was not the career that I wanted, and met an individual who was retired from Dow Chemicals named Jack Martin. And Jack was an African-American who had been a programmer at Dow. And I met him at what was then a technical trade school, because at that time where I was living, there were no community colleges in that area. And Jack really lit my candle on technology and how technology was going to change the way businesses operated and those types of things. And that became my initial entrance into the world of technology and networking and those types of things. And so over the 35 years, a lot of my companies have been technology-oriented or online education-oriented and consumer-driven, internet sales and e-commerce, those types of things. And through that journey, I had the opportunity first to start a services-oriented business. And the business was basically anything technology services oriented, but the business started as a side hustle. I was working in a technology corporate job and was very unfulfilled. I liked the people I worked with. I just didn't like the corporate setting. And I also realized, because my wife and I had gotten married young, I was looking at my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old daughters at the time. And I realized early on that I wasn't going to sustain financial independence working in a corporate job. I wasn't going to be able to provide at a level that I desired for my children working in a corporate job. So I needed to do something to supplement my income. That's where this started. And I had met an individual who owned a small business bookkeeping service, and he asked me if I could help some of his clients with their technology needs. And that's how I'd started. And little by little, I realized that first I had to build confidence in myself that I could deliver quality services, that I could make consistent money doing it. The real lesson here was understanding that I was bringing something of value to the market, something that another business owner would be willing to pay for. And little by little, that became the side hustle leading to my first full-time company. Now, look, my personal background is my mom and dad we were poor. I grew up in the Deep South. We were poor. Neither one of my parents graduated from college. My dad would be thought of he held a lot of different types of jobs in his life, but basically a blue-collar family. And the first transaction that I had was life-changing. It was a life-changing transaction. And I remember this distinctly because my paternal grandparents were getting older and needed more continuous care. And I remember, as I was going through the process of selling my first 2 companies, it was also during that time when we were deciding what we were going to do with my grandparents. How were they going to be cared for? And I remember bringing home my first check. It was a kind of a staged buyout. And I remember bringing home that check and showing it to my grandmother, who had never seen that kind of money in her life. None of us had. Millions of dollars in the first transaction. And it was also something that kind of clicked in me, that I realized a purpose, a very distinct purpose. My why for starting my company was always my family. It was always driven by providing for my family in a very distinct way. But I also realized I was also going to be responsible for some greater family members, meaning my grandparents, and then ultimately my parents. And so the purpose behind some of the activity that was happening in my life started to really be very succinct. And so through that 35 years, I was able to, as I said, start 10 companies and exit 7 of those 10 companies. And I think really the message that I want to project here is that if a non-college graduate, because I am a non-college graduate, living in the Deep South, can acquire a skill of value, bring that skill to market, and build multiple companies and ultimately exit those companies. My goal with the DuBos Group and the Top Gun Launch Academy and the Launch Capsule is individually helping one entrepreneur at a time understand that this is possible for you too. Because if it can happen for me, it can absolutely happen for you. I believe completely that I'm the product of the American dream, and that the American market, the capital markets, reward those who bring value and solve problems every day. And so throughout this journey, whether it be on the YouTube channel, my Launch Capsule podcast, or working individually one-on-one with you as entrepreneurs, my goal is to help you understand how to build your businesses, build a business of value, so that at the end of the journey, whatever that timing may be for you, at the end of the journey, you're able to transition with the maximum amount of value for yourself, but also in a healthy way for the people that are in. I've got 4 videos they're interview type videos that I recorded on 4 pillars for your journey as an entrepreneur, because we all know that entrepreneurship is difficult. Elon Musk said it greatly. He said, imagine staring off into the abyss while chewing glass. It's very difficult at times to be an entrepreneur. And so these 4 pillars of gratitude and humility, teamwork, and servant leadership are very distinct characteristics that I have found in my own journey to allow me to be fulfilled individually as an entrepreneur as I go through the journey of building my companies. And so I encourage you after this video to watch those 4 videos. They're not very long, but it gives you a little insight into the way I think about how to cultivate yourself as you grow and develop your business. So I really appreciate your time. Your time is the most valuable thing that you have. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this little insight into the DuBos group and into myself. And I hope you subscribe and come along this journey with us. And if there's ever anything that I can do for you, please reach out. Have an awesome day.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James DuBos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.